to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive insights and fresh perspectives from leading experts and influential decision makers every weekday on Al Arabiya News. I'm Rosanna Lockwood. Coming up on the show, a fiery debate with personal blows. We bring you a comprehensive breakdown of the key moments of the Harris-Trump face-off from our team on the ground. Plus, we'll delve into the policies that were front and centre with the former Director of Press Advance under President Obama, Johanna Maska, and the former member of President Trump's White House transition team, Halper-Hayes. And a snap poll showing Harris's favourability has risen, with 45% saying they view her favourably compared to 39% before. We'll have analysis from a pollster and insight into who the VP really is with her biographer. Welcome. Look, it was a night of high stakes, high drama in what many are calling the most pivotal moment of this race to the White House. From fiery exchanges on foreign policies, abortion and inflation, to moments of unexpected candour, this debate had it all. Well, for more on the events of the night, I'm joined now from Washington, D.C. by our correspondent Benji. Hi, Benji. A really big night for the two candidates. Tell us your takeaways.
Yeah, and Kamala Harris going on the offensive against Donald Trump in their first ever face-to-face meeting on stage in the city of Philadelphia in the must-win state of Pennsylvania. It started, with a gesture of goodwill from Kamala Harris reaching out for a handshake, but then really she went straight to attack mode against the former president, trying to get under his skin, really, by picking out his sensitivities about crowd sizes and other issues. Yes, they discussed the economy. Yes, they discussed immigration, but at times, Mr. Trump descending into the typical tropes that have epitomized not just his campaigning in this election season, but the others as well. I mean, one of the viral clips that we've now seen trending for the past couple of hours is him rambling about immigrants eating dogs and eating cats as they come into the country. Outlandish claims, frankly, from the former president, which are totally false, and giving Kamala Harris the opportunity to move the conversation away from immigration, which happened to be Trump's strongest topic. They touched upon other major issues, abortion, where there is really a stark difference between the former president and the vice president. Donald Trump given the opportunity to admit, or at least confirm, that he would veto a nationwide abortion ban. He decided against that. He made other accusations, again, false, towards the Democrats, that they wanted to execute babies following childbirth. Foreign policy was a big topic too. There has been a lot going on during the Biden administration, the fallout from the withdrawal of Afghanistan, wars erupting, of course, in Europe and the Middle East. Kamala Harris having to defend her ground there after being tied to the administration's foreign policy failing. She was also attacked by Donald Trump for her flip-flopping on many domestic issues. But ultimately, I think that often there's this conversation about if you watch a debate, it's best to do it with the sound on but the visuals off, to really get an understanding, Rosanna, of what the candidates are talking about. I think really the story is told here through often watching with the sound off and just watching their body language and the demeanour of the vice president versus that of Donald Trump. And I'm sure there'll be a lot of experts looking at that and pundits estimating that, in fact, it was the vice president who came out on top in this debate.
Kamala Harris.
It started with a handshake, yet that's where the goodwill ended. After defending her flip-flop policy stances, Kamala Harris went for the jugular, getting under Donald Trump's skin by hitting out at his crowd sizes. He took the bait. On immigration, perhaps the former president's strongest topic, he instead reverted to wild and baseless conspiracy theories.
In Springfield, they're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating the pets of the people that live there. And this is what's happening in our country. There's never been anything done like this at all. They've destroyed the fabric of our country. Millions of people let in. And all over the world, crime is down. All over the world except here. Crime here is up and through the roof.
This is so rich, coming from someone who has been prosecuted for national security crimes, economic crimes, election interference, has been found liable for sexual assault.
Dozens of those criminal charges centred on his efforts to subvert democracy. Last night, he repeated his lie that the previous election was stolen from him.
Are you now acknowledging that you lost in 2020?
No, I don't acknowledge that at all.
Then abortion, Trump refusing to commit to vetoing a nationwide abortion ban and falsely alleging that Democrats want to execute babies following childbirth.
There is no state in this country where it is legal to kill a baby after it's born. Madam Vice President, I want to get your response.
The government, and Donald Trump certainly, should not be telling a woman what to do with her body.
She hates Israel.
On foreign policy, Trump tried to tie Harris to the Biden administration's failures, the withdrawal from Afghanistan, wars in Europe and the Middle East. He suggested Israel wouldn't exist if Harris won. He didn't confirm if he wanted Ukraine to beat Russia. She said world leaders are laughing at Trump, that they think he's a, quote, disgrace, and that Russian President Vladimir Putin would eat him for lunch. The goading continued, their body language telling the story. Trump at times cutting a figure of fury, Harris sporting a studied look of bemusement, incredulity.
This was my best debate. I thought it was very good.
As pundits presented their verdict, Donald Trump stepped into the spin room himself to claim victory.
Vice President of the United States.
Whilst Kamala Harris, buoyed by an endorsement last night from pop star Taylor Swift, shook off the bad blood on stage to take to another at a watch party packed with supporters. She's already calling for a second debate. That was fun, her campaign said. Let's do it again in October. Benji Haya, Al Arabiya English, Washington.
Benji, there's a lot of discussion about whether we're actually going to see these two candidates debate each other again before the election itself. What's the latest?
Well, I mean, this was the first debate. There may be others. There have not been others confirmed, but I think it's an indication of how well the vice president has done according to her own campaign, that straight after both she and Donald Trump exited the stage, her campaign came out to say that she already wants a second debate before November, before Americans go to the polls. Her campaign saying, that was fun, let's do it again in October. Now, Donald Trump claims that the only reason Kamala Harris wants to do this is because she lost the debate and wants another opportunity. Of course, that's how he's spinning it. That's how his team are framing it. He has not committed to a second debate. And frankly, the understanding here is that it is unlikely. This was seen as the first and only, but the American people may want to get an even greater understanding of where Kamala Harris stands on many issues. Donald Trump may decide that if the polls keep going away from him and in favour of his rival, that actually it may be in his interest to have another go and another debate. But time is running out. Yes, polling day is on November 5th, but in many states, the opportunity for people to cast their ballot opens many weeks before. And so if they want to try to put their pitch to voters, that is going to have to be done much more sooner than polling day itself.
And look, a large part of electioneering these days is about getting those big endorsements from big names. And one big name in particular in the hours after the debate last night coming out, a certain female pop star. Tell us about it. Do you think it's going to make a difference?
This is a really interesting one, right? Taylor Swift, and I'm sure people have heard by now, posting on Instagram to her hundreds of millions of followers that she will be voting for Kamala Harris. Not just saying that she stands against Donald Trump, but saying that she will vote for the vice president and her running mate, Tim Walz, calling her a warrior, and signing off the post saying that she is a childless cat lady, a reference to comments made by Donald Trump's running mate, Senator J.D. Vance, in relation to women who hadn't given birth either out of choice or not being able to. Controversial remarks at the time. Now, this endorsement is obviously going to favour Kamala Harris. What is interesting about it is the timing, right? It's come right after this debate, literally minutes after it ended. And you could look at that and say, well, that somewhat takes the limelight away from what at least the Harris camp sees as a good debate for the vice president, and that, they want that continuing in the headlines. And it might have been better for this Taylor Swift endorsement to wait. On the other hand, what it does is it draws attention towards this debate, which again her campaign sees as one that she came out on top, and that is going to be pivotal for many Americans who didn't tune in, who are perhaps more apathetic about politics. I doubt that Taylor Swift endorsement is going to convince Trump voters to switch sides. What it might do is engage voter bases who hadn't turned into the debate, hadn't seen what a good job Kamala Harris had done according to her campaign, and may now start to get engaged. So in that sense, it could make a difference off the back of this pivotal debate.
Benji, hi, speaking to us from Washington, D.C. Thank you. Well, now to discuss who came out on top of the debate. Joining us is the former director of press advance under President Obama and currently still the host of the brilliant Press Advance podcast, Johanna Maska. Johanna, great of you to make time for us today. I know you'll be busy sort of summing up what you saw last night, but your initial takeaways, any surprises for you?
Well, I was initially very worried about how this debate would go because I worked with President Obama in 2008, and he had more than 20 debates against Hillary Clinton before he ever had a debate against John McCain. But last night, Kamala Harris showed up for that debate, and she did exactly what she needed to do. She talked about issues that matter to Democrats. She got her Democratic base completely motivated. I mean, people were really nervous. And they, last night, in watching her, in watching the confidence in which she was able to deliver her message against Donald Trump, she reassured Democrats that she is the right candidate to take on Donald Trump. This after, of course, Joe Biden was on the debate stage against Donald Trump and did not show Democrats that. So Democrats are feeling pretty good in America after that debate, having seen Kamala Harris on that stage. Republicans, maybe not so much. A lot of them are blaming the moderators of the debate for Trump's performance. But I think you can only go so far with that, given Donald Trump brought up topics that they weren't even talking about on the debate stage, and some conspiracy theories that led a lot of Americans to kind of scratch their heads.
We'll get the Republican viewpoint shortly about that. But just, you're a host of a podcast. I'm a host as well of a show. We know what it's like to moderate conversations. How do you think they did perform, the moderators?
I loved that they didn't make anything about themselves. It was all about the substance in the debate. I can cede the point that there should have been more discussion of the economy. I wish Kamala Harris would have forcefully taken the inflation argument. A lot of Americans are very concerned about inflation. Inflation is a worldwide effect of closing down the economy for the pandemic, and really showed that Donald Trump was the one who mismanaged a pandemic, led PPP spending in America, all of the COVID spending efforts. A lot of that went through banks and led to massive fraud and abuse, more fraud and abuse than Americans have seen spent in the war in Ukraine. And if she had effectively tied that to Trump, he is not a fiscal conservative. So I think there could have been more discussion of the economy, because that is very important. But Kamala Harris did bring up issues that matter to younger voters, because we see it taking jobs, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, kind of the future of America. We didn't see so much of that from Donald Trump. His was kind of the same playbook that he's used. The reason that America is struggling, he argues, is because of immigrants. Immigrants historically in America have actually added to our economy, not subtracted from our economy. But the most puzzling thing that he said last night was he brought up this just completely false story about Haitian migrants in a small town in Ohio stealing and eating people's pets, which really had people, not sure exactly where this was going. A lot of times candidates will run to the far extremes of the party when they're in a primary. And then when they get into the general election, they try to appeal to a more moderate voter. That is not what Donald Trump did last night. That is what Kamala Harris did last night.
Johanna, thank you for giving us your viewpoint. I'll come back to you on a few of those policy points, but I'm pleased to say we can now bring in our Republican viewpoint on this. Dr. Jan Halper-Hayes joins us. She was the former member of Trump's White House transition team. Thank you very much. And I was just discussing there, with Johanna, Jan, that there have been accusations of bias, of course, about the ABC News moderators, how they handled the debate. That was sort of expected because, it was almost like people were prepared for them to have some sort of bias and then want to prove that to be the case. Johanna's saying she felt like they handled it pretty fairly, but there were other topics she wished they'd covered. How did you think the debate was handled?
Well, I think it was 3 against 1. And they did constantly fact check Trump and not Kamala. But I am against the kind of debate where the candidate only criticizes the other candidate and you don't know where that candidate really stands. Because when she was asked the question very pointedly that Bidenomics has not been working, she just danced over it. And there were other times she'd say, and I'll get to it, but then she stuck with just her superficial points. And I really wanted to know what Kamala Harris actually stood for. And I didn't get that at all from her statements. It was generalizations that you had heard through the DNC convention as well.
And in the spirit, I will come to you, Johanna, on responding to that. But in the spirit of fairness, as a moderator of a debate, just like we saw last night, I'm going to come to Jan one more time and just talk about how you felt Trump then performed, because we just focused there on Harris. But some are saying Trump felt underprepared on stage. Do you think that's right? Oh, I think we've just lost it.
Sorry, my dog was just about to do a squeaky toy.
Oh,
I just... I had to make sure that wasn't going to happen. I'm so sorry. I actually thought Trump looked tired. I also thought he was very consistent about how worried he is about the country and how angry he is about the way the Biden administration has been running things. I don't look at these debates as who performed the best. I know that is what the media is looking at, but I wanted to know, did Trump get his points in? Did he miss other points? And I thought he was actually far more respectful to her than I had anticipated.
That's an interesting point of view. I had the same sort of takeaway, and I wondered whether, and I don't want to sort of harp on too much about the woman point, but with 3 women here talking about this, you're looking at the possibility of having a first female president of the US. And we heard before the debate that they would just treat each other as candidates, as opponents, rather than, thinking about gender. But did you find he was more respectful than, say, he was towards Hillary Rodham Clinton, Jan?
Oh, he had good lines for Hillary. He did. You'd be in jail, yeah. But and they had a repartee. Hillary and Trump really had a repartee going between them in all of the debates. Kamala was focused on getting her practice points across, and she did that well. I don't think that. Well, I happen to know from looking at X, formerly Twitter, last night, and Getter and Truth Social, people were dropping out of the debate at least a quarter to a half a way through. They just either thought it was painful listening to her, or it wasn't going anywhere and they didn't feel that the moderators were objective enough.
Interesting. I mean, Johanna, let's come back to you on those initial points that Jan made about not really finding out who Kamala was. And that's a consistent kind of criticism we hear about Kamala Harris. Who is she? Does she stand for enough? Is she strong enough? And some, despite the polls showing they swung in her favor after the debate, saying they didn't still get a clear idea of who she was. Do you think it's fair?
Yeah, I've heard a lot of Republicans saying this, and I just find it a little hypocritical because Donald Trump literally changes his minds on things between when he's briefed by his team and when he makes a decision. I mean, literally, they're prepping something different. His former defense secretary talked about this, and then he makes a totally different decision. So, you know, with Kamala Harris, she actually, in California, she was a prosecutor. So she was too conservative for a lot of my more progressive friends. She has been more right than a lot of people in California. And, you know, while the last time around she ran, she did talk a little bit about, I mean, obviously she's concerned about climate change, and she did have concerns about fracking. She has been pretty consistent now that she wants all options on the table, and she wants us to transition to a clean economy, which is very important. You know, on this, Trump was talking about, you know, things that matter to the American people. It is a dark picture that he painted of America. He talked about America dying. He talked about, you know, migrants overrunning our cities. You know, two things cannot be true. American is strong. First, America is very strong. That is why immigrants are trying to get to America. They are risking their lives and they are dying to get to America because we still have that American dream. And that, you know, if Donald Trump wants to take that message and he believes that America is such a terrible country, I think he's going to be sorely disappointed because the American people do not all believe that, especially our young people. We want a politician who's going to take on the issues that are going to matter to us: artificial intelligence, quantum computing, future of our economy. And that is what Kamala Harris showed that she's going to do, and in a bipartisan fashion for anyone who wants to come to the side of reason and normality and not talk about America as a dying country, because we are not.
Jan, coming to you on that, because there is talk of Trump trashing America as part of his campaign strategy. Do you think he's doing that?
Well, I wouldn't use the word trashing, but if you look at the amount of inflation, the prices of food, the fact that people have to give up certain things and can't put food on the table for their family, the fact that the price of petrol has doubled or tripled, when you look at that and how Bidenomics hasn't worked, that's what he's talking about. The other thing is the fact that, yes, we are a country that was built on immigrants, but they came in legally. They paid their dues. They did it the right way. These people are crossing the border, and every town has become a border town. And even though they are saying crime hasn't gone up, which is gaslighting the public, when you look at the amount of deaths and rapes and burglaries, we really need to face the fact that we have illegal aliens that have come into our country. And that is the part that Trump was emphasizing. Also, I look at results. The economy, even after the pandemic, Trump was able to start to bring the economy back. The economy, in terms of people being able to live and the cost of things, it's over $4,000 now more a year that it's costing people to live, and wages haven't gone up. So it's difficult, and he's presenting reality. He wasn't interested in presenting joy and a happy picture, because if you look at the basics, that's what he dealt with when he came in 2016, and that's what he'll deal with in 2024.
Johanna, coming to you, did Kamala do enough to convince voters that she is actually going to be strong in immigration? As we're hearing there from Jan, immigration and economy, as the world knows, is what this election is going to be fought on. And there are American voters that feel like the Biden administration has been weak on immigration. Did Kamala seize the opportunity to prove otherwise?
This whole argument that immigration just got bad under Biden is just false. My entire adult life, and I've been in politics for 20 plus years, no one has managed to reform the immigration system. This notion that all of these people came in legally before is because you came to Ellis Island, and if you weren't sick, you came into our country. So this, what we have seen is the Congress's inability to address migration and migration needs and our immigration system in a holistic way. We've got people who have fought alongside Americans who are still here waiting on asylum cases. We need reform. She correctly, whether it was enough information for voters is a different story, but she correctly pointed to they negotiated a deal with the Senate that was more hawkish than anything Democrats would agree to, that gave them more border control, but also had money for asylum cases to turn on those court systems. And the Republicans were the ones who spiked it. And not because it wasn't a good deal, because Donald Trump couldn't own it. And that's a problem. This is the thin argument that the Republicans are making. I live in a border state. I live in a border state that wants our immigrants to come to America legally so that we can have safe cities, but you can't just blame migrants on all of this crime. And crime statistics are down. As much as people want to say that we're living in a terrible place in America, I mean, the context is skewed. When you go anywhere else in the world, you realize how lucky and how blessed you are to live in America, where we do have safe communities and we do have police forces who respond, teachers who teach our kids. And when we undermine these things, when we undermine the institutions, it is to our detriment. I want to see both parties stop, but I will say that Kamala Harris, for her part, I think did a very good job of talking about the America that's possible when we turn our backs on this inaction that has been my entire adult life with Congress.
Thanks, Johanna. Jan, just staying with immigration, because I think it was just before you joined us, we were talking about the comments that Donald Trump made about Haitian immigrants eating cats and dogs. That's one of the lines that has taken the headlines. Eating pets in the town of Springfield is what he spoke about in the debate. It's
been on TV. It's been on TV. This is not, Donald Trump does not pull things out of the air to make a comment. This has been all over social media. It has, and the residents of Springfield have complained about it. But I'd also like to go to a point that Johanna brought up, which is something I share, and it is a frustration with Congress. And when I was the global vice president of Republicans overseas, we had a congressman here giving a talk, and I asked him, why is immigration still on the table and you never resolve it? And he gave me a very truthful answer. He said, if we get it resolved, then both sides have nothing to campaign on. And they have done nothing for 30 years. We've got this continuing resolution that keeps going, and it is the way the uniparty gets to avoid dealing with things. So I very much agree with her frustration on that. I would say that I wouldn't put a negative on the way things are being presented. I think Johanna has presented a very upbeat message, but Donald Trump is talking about the reality that a lot of people, a good 2/3 of the country is feeling. And that's what his concern is.
Johanna, your response to that? Reality. It's a reality check is what Jan's saying, rather than just sort of endless positivity.
I grew up in Galesburg, Illinois. Galesburg, Illinois is a place that lost Maytag. It lost manufacturing. That manufacturing is critical to our economy. It's also critical to our national security that we have a strong manufacturing base. Both parties are responsible for that loss. Both parties let manufacturing walk away and didn't think about the national security ramifications. 100%, we need to solve for some of these issues. The jobs that we have in America are not the jobs of yesterday, and we need those strong jobs. Now, we also, I believe, in America have so much opportunity to solve problems for America and for the globe, and not turn our back on the globe, not say that migrants are the problem. We've got problems around the world. But if we could come together and actually work on some of these problems, America is still the strongest country. And I'm sorry, but I do not want to live in a world in which China or Russia is the one that's leading the world economy. So yes, 100%, I understand Americans are hurting. Those are many of my family members, many of the people I grew up with who are hurting still because of inaction, because of bad policy. We have to address that. Do I trust one leader to address it whole stop without any input? Absolutely not. That is why I am troubled when Donald Trump only believes and only listens to himself. And I will say, Kamala Harris, for all of her issues that she may have, and I'll admit, every person, every politician has issues, she listens, and that's what we need.
Not to hop on about the cats and dogs, Jan, but I realised that information was spread around social media and it was on certain television. But the ABC moderator in the debate, whether you agree with them or not, fact-checked Donald Trump at that point and said, you know, we've reached out to the town manager of Springfield, Ohio, and he's denied hearing any of these reports. And Trump dismissed that and said, well, you know, what's he got to say? And it was on TV and it was. But do you, rather than sort of focusing on the accuracy of that, if you don't agree with the moderator and the way they fact-checked, what about the fact that he seemed to get distracted in sort of sensationalist ideas rather than hitting policy points? Do you think that's a fair assessment?
Well, I think that Donald Trump is very good. If you even go back to his tweets, he used them in 4 different strategic ways. 1 was to float ideas. 2 was to head off a problem before it became a problem, to get feedback from the public. The 3rd was to use it as a distraction. And the 4th was as a deflection. I mean, what was happening was that it's almost a way to bring comic relief to the tension of what's going on and get them to refocus back on the serious issues.
Johanna, what do you make of it as a strategy?
I don't think we need comic relief. I mean, to the point that Americans are hurting.
I didn't say comic relief. I said it's like breaking the tension.
Well, and look, I understand. Like, a lot of times, Democrats will say Donald Trump is terrible. You know, he doesn't have any ideas. And sometimes he does have ideas. So I understand the frustration that Republicans have. But I mean, the problem with this report is, yeah, you saw it on TV. Maybe Fox News is reporting something, but it's not true. Just because someone says the sky is purple doesn't mean the sky is purple. There needs to be an investigation. In a world where we've got artificial intelligence, and I'm watching, I mean, Drudge has this photo of Trump in his airplane hugging cats and geese. And, you know, artificial intelligence can be really comic relief, but we need the truth. And from the President of the United States, the former President of the United States, to talk about citing reports from the news. He heard it on the news and not actually investigating it and talking to the people who are on the ground dealing with these issues is part of the problem that people have with Donald Trump.
Let's move on from the past.
If I could just say about that is that what the video showed was the woman being arrested and the woman declaring that she had eaten that animal. So this is not a report. This was the police there arresting the woman in action. And I know that people will want to twist it because it does seem so weird and sensational. And look how much time we're spending on it here when actually there are other things that we could be talking about, but it becomes a distraction.
Indeed. Look, let's indeed move on from the cats and dogs because Johanna made an interesting point, Jan, as we started the conversation about Democrats uniting now behind Harris, where, you know, it got to the point with Biden in the previous debate where Democrats, excuse me, weren't necessarily united behind him, as we saw he then stood by. How about Republicans? You've been with the Republicans overseas. You and I have spoken in London before with you in that capacity. Do you think Republicans are uniting behind Trump?
Oh, not only that, but the fact that Robert F. Kennedy Jr. has joined the campaign, will be one of the key leaders on his transition team. That what that has done is it has brought a whole new group of people in that are so excited about the fact that we might actually be bringing our country closer together. I mean, you've got a Democrat and a Republican. I mean, the Camelot Democrat. And it was a very tough decision for RFK Jr. to make. But people are absolutely thrilled by it, because here's the other thing, and this was a worry of mine. Trump has been very supportive of Operation Warp Speed, which was the vaccine. And it has some controversy around it, but there were some people that were concerned and on the fence if they were going to vote for him. RFK Jr. coming in and dealing with Fauci and all of the problems around our whole health care, that has put so many people at ease. And people are excited because they actually believe we might move a bit more to the center. Now, I will tell you that the people who worked on Project 2025, which Trump is rightfully having nothing to do with, is that they're upset that what is happening is that people are coalescing more to the center and not staying strongly to the right. And I think tough luck for them, because they need to get with the times. If we're going to bring our country together, I mean, even listening to Johanna and some of the issues, if she and I were to sit and have a cup of coffee, I think we would find commonality on quite a few things. Let's take the candidates out of it, especially in Congress and dealing with the problems. And that's what we're looking for. We're looking for bringing the country together, and Trump has wanted to do that. When he didn't participate in the first debate and he did an interview with Tucker Carlson, he made a comment. He said, I want to be the president for all the people. And we know the media likes to, say no, and he's divisive. But every step that he keeps making is to move more to the center. People have been upset with the RNC platform because for 40 years, they were so anti-abortion and anti-IVF. And Trump has come out very strongly in support of IVF and in support for limited, including rape, incest, or at the risk of the mother's life. And that might have upset some of the hard right, but that is where our country is at. And Trump he's always had his finger on the pulse. That's why he won in 2016. And I think that's why he has so much support now.
Jan, that's given me so much I want to talk to Johanna about. The idea of Trump moving more to the centre ground on some points being one thing you've raised, distancing himself from Project 2025, that sort of conservative, controversial manifesto, I think backed by the Heritage Foundation. You say correctly so. But actually, the one thing I want to ask Johanna about was your reaction. I saw there when Jan was talking about RFK Jr. and his healthcare policy. Is that something you'd like to see in America, Johanna?
No. This notion that Donald Trump has his finger on the pulse. I mean, I grew up in Galesburg, Illinois. Like I said, that's, real America. Donald Trump lives in a penthouse in New York. So his finger on the pulse. I just, I agree with you, Jan. If you and I sat down, I am absolutely sure we could find so many areas of agreement. My distrust for people who live in penthouses and say that they're connected with Americans is you know, because it's kind of hard to be connected with Americans when you're coming up and down an escalator. RFK Jr. is a troubled child of a famous politician. He had multiple drug arrests. He had issues with women. To me, he's more like Hunter Biden than he is like a politician that I want to emulate. The vaccine, I think that the Trump administration, Secretary of Defense Mark Esper talked about how he and HHS were working on this. You know, obviously, it was miraculous speed that they got a vaccine to market. I hate that it was politicized. I hate that when Trump was in office, I had friends saying that they weren't going to take the vaccine because it was invented by a Republican. And when you know, Trump left office and the Democrat rolled it out, they were all in line for the vaccines. I hate that these things became political because it's a public health epidemic. But I do love that America was the one first to the market with a drug that could save lives during a global pandemic, and we'll need that innovation again. The RFK Jr. coming to Donald Trump's defenses, maybe it's a small slither of Americans who are going to follow that, and I completely understand the Americans who have concerns about our healthcare system, about big pharma, about the influence that they have. I think we should discuss that. But RFK Jr. as their poster child, be careful who you root for when you've got a guy who had a dead bear that he left in Central Park and thought that there would be no consequences to his action. If Galesburg, Illinois, if you left a dead bear in the middle of the park, there would be consequences to your actions. And that's, I think, the out-of-touch nature of people who grew up in very different situations than I did.
Look, Jan, just coming back to you on that, but we're going to have to wrap things up soon. But you talked about gaining RFK Jr., of course, as a supporter, uniting Republicans. You gained Tulsi Gabbard as well on the Republican side, but lost the Cheneys, Liz Cheney and her father, former Vice President Dick Cheney, and various other Republicans who said they couldn't back Trump. What does that feel like to you as a Republican overseas?
Oh, well, good. I think that Liz Cheney has been an absolute traitor. You know, that is an old regime. That is a neoconservative regime. And they have not moved with the times, with the people. They are part of the elites. And that is it's the elites that fear and dislike Trump the most. Because actually you could say something about him being in a penthouse, but he grew up on construction sites. He's always been called the blue-collar billionaire. He does have his finger on the pulse of people. There are many, many wonderful stories, not that I'll get into them because I'm not here to promote him. I am here to really talk about the strength of the platform that the RNC has, and that Trump will carry that forward, and that RFK, Tulsi Gabbard, Vivek Ramaswamy, you look, Elon Musk, who wants to come in and get rid of all of the inefficiencies in our government. And in fact, do you know, we lose over $60 billion a year because agencies do not renew their software. I mean, we get Elon in there. Look at that team. They all come with a set of skills that can focus on the issues that are the real problems of today.
Ladies, just wrapping up, and you know, I don't want to minimize any of this because it's been a fascinating discussion, but come on, Taylor Swift has come out and endorsed Kamala Harris in the hours after the debate. Some are saying it's actually going to swing the election. Do you agree with that, Johanna?
No, I think people are going to make their own decisions. Swifties, you know, very welcome to vote for Kamala Harris, but I think they do as much as Elon Musk's endorsement. They're only going to show like what you already felt. You're just going to be reinforced. And the notion of Elon Musk saving America when he couldn't even save X when he had plenty of money to do it, I just don't believe it.
Does it change anything for you, Jan, Taylor Swift coming out in support for Harris?
No, we knew it was going to happen. And it's really no different than when she came out against Trump in 2020. So, I think that if you look at Trump's reach on TikTok, which hit 1 billion, he's influencing the younger people. They're getting a sense of him, and they'll be able to make their own decisions. People are getting a lot wiser because politics is just permeated every day of our lives. It's not like when I was growing up that you didn't discuss religion and politics. Now, all we do is discuss those two subjects.
You're absolutely right on that one there, Jan. I can agree with you there. Look, Jan Halper-Hayes and Johanna Maska, it's been great speaking to you both. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Still to come, I'm going to speak to Kamala Harris's biographer, Dan Morain. Stick around for that next.
From the White House to Gaza, Kyiv to Beijing, elections, economics, and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake, and artificial intelligence,
they've got to have a vote and a say.
It's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
my campaign is going very well.
Presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers.
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
Join me on The Riz Khan Show for empowering conversations.
Well, to rake over the coals of last night's debate, I'm now joined by former senior strategist to Donald Trump, Dr. Sebastian Gorka. Sir, thank you for your time. Let's just start with the obvious. What did you think of Trump's performance in the debate?
Well, as I tweeted out right after the debate, it was better than I expected for Kamala. She did her homework. She had her New York Times talking points squirreled away in her cranium. And President Trump allowed her to get under his skin. And of course, look, the bottom line is he wasn't debating her. He was debating her and the two moderators who are completely in the tank for the Democrat Party. So it was 3-1. But at the end of the day, look, let's be honest. Debates don't win elections unless it's, the 5 o'clock shadow for Nixon versus JFK. It doesn't change the price of petrol, doesn't change the price of a dozen eggs in America. These are for the wonks, these are for the political freaks. Very few Americans sat through that 90-minute-long diatribe. And as a result, it doesn't really move the needle for either Kamala or the president. So in the next 55 days, there's still everything to play for.
Well, that sounds very aligned, your words there, with what we heard from Trump himself this morning, speaking on Fox and Friends, himself saying he just didn't feel inclined to do another debate because he said he felt like he came out on top last night. Is this just a way of basically trying to sidestep doing another discussion with Harris?
Well, it's not going to happen. I mean, it's a pointless discussion. There is absolutely no way that Kamala Harris will agree to another debate. It was hard enough to get her to agree to this one with all her ridiculous demands about having access to notes, and she wants live mic so she can talk over him in the break. There is no advantage to her. She thinks she's done amazingly, and as a result, it would be absolutely foolish of her to agree to another debate. So even if my former boss says yes, I'm sorry, it's not going to happen. We're going to have J.D. Vance versus Tim Walz, the Veep candidates debate, and that's going to be it, I'm afraid.
What was working? So you're saying working against Trump last night with the moderators, in your view, from ABC. You feel like they were in the Democrat camp. That's your opinion. What else?
No, it's not an opinion. I mean, look at the absurd things they said. Muir said, and you told your followers to march to the Capitol on January the 6th. How strange, and God bless President Trump for pointing it out, that he left out the actual thing the president said. I was right there in the front row at the White House listening to the president on that cold January day, and he said, we will patriotically and peacefully march to the Capitol so our voices can be heard. So when the quote-unquote journalist leaves out the most important part, peacefully and patriotically, and when they fact-check President Trump on numerous occasions and don't fact-check her once. I mean, one of the most egregious moments when she said, the policemen who were killed on January the 6th, no policemen were killed on January 6th. The only person who was murdered that day was Ashley Babbitt, a 14-year Air Force veteran, a 90-pound unarmed woman who was shot in the neck and killed by Lieutenant Michael Byrd. Thankfully, President Trump made that clear. But yeah, whether it's the fact-checking of him and not her, whether it's the Democrat talking points, this wasn't a debate. This was a show trial for Kamala and her buddies.
Do you feel like there were other points where Harris wasn't fact-checked, where you would like to have seen fact-checking?
Oh my gosh, utterly. I mean, think about the fact that she is now talking about building the wall, or she's saying that she's not going to ban fracking. I could show you clips now of interminable instances on the campaign trail as senator, as vice president designate, where she said, we will end fracking. I am coming after your assault rifles. And the fact that the commentator said, hang on a second, for the last 7 years, you've been talking about banning fracking, but now you're not only pro-fossil fuels, you want to build the wall. You are the border czarina, and you let more than 20 million illegals into America. But now you're stealing President Trump's platforms, whether it's building the wall or no tax on tips. So strange that the moderators didn't think to fact-check her on her multiple 180s.
Well, let's talk about missed opportunities by Trump then, because the moderators asked him whether he would like to see Ukraine win the war with Russia, and there wasn't really a response on that. Do you think that's a misstep?
No, because I agree with what he said. I mean, what partisan hackery. The moderators say, hey, don't you want Ukraine to win? What kind of a question is that? Well, are we taking sides in other wars? Is it not up to the Ukrainians to decide whether or not they want to win? President Trump, and I know this implicitly, and I've discussed it with him personally, he wants one thing and one thing alone, for the bloodshed to end. Whether it's the hundreds of thousands of Russians or whether it's the benighted Ukrainian civilians and military, he wants it to end. And I guarantee you what he said last night is absolutely true. If God willing, and we do our part and he is reelected to the 47th presidency, then even before he's inaugurated, the fighting will end, because Vladimir Putin is afraid of my former boss. And I can tell you why. When we told him 300 special forces from Russia are running around Syria, he said, really? Kill them all. And within 4 hours, they were red mist. No American president has done that in the last, since the revolution of 1917. So the president's right. It's not about who's going to win. It's about stopping the unnecessary bloodshed.
Let's talk about one of the other major points of contention that has been played out time and time again in debates and interviews with Trump. And then recently he said about the loss of the 2020 US election. He'd said in a previous interview quite recently, well, yes, okay, I didn't win. And then saying again, well, actually, I was being sarcastic about that, insisting he won the US 2020 election. Do you think he's just going to stick to that narrative throughout? And should he?
Well, look, it's a fact. I mean, it's just a fact. And you don't need to talk about voting machines or pristine ballots or the unconstitutional decisions by governors who had no remit to do so, not to verify the signatures on mail-in ballots. If anyone believes that a senile, decrepit old white guy who campaigned from his basement got more votes than the first black president, I have a bridge to sell you in Connecticut. So we know what happened in 2020. Under the cover of COVID, they mailed out 81 million mail-in ballots unbidden, and that's how they perverted that election.
I mean, Mr. Gorka, it's a bold a statement. It's a bold line to stick to. I know it's something you've talked about a lot, and it is your firm belief. Others would say Biden won fair and square. And what you're suggesting there is that he's then not been a legitimate president for the last 4 years?
Well, look, let's just talk about, if you want to go into the minutiae of it, there are 16 counties in America that are deemed the bellwether counties. And if you win the majority of those, then you become the president. That's just demonstrated through polling for the last 50 years. President Trump won 15 out of the 16. How do you win 15 of the 16 and not win the presidency? Or how about this? Incumbent presidents never get more votes than they did the first time round when they win. Not only did he get more votes, he got almost 10 million more votes in 2020 than he did in 2016, the most votes in American history of any incumbent president. And we're supposed to believe that Joe Biden won, especially in those battleground states where the voting was mysteriously halted at 2 a.m. President Trump was winning at the time, and then 6 hours later when they recommenced the vote counting, oh, it flipped. Come on, let's live in the real world, please.
I mean, does this mean, when I hear arguments like that, for example, about a stolen election or about a justice system being quote unquote weaponized, Operation Lawfare, as Trump calls it, the various trials that he's been going through, it sounds like there is no faith or belief in American systems. Is that the case?
Well, you tell me. The current leader of the opposition is facing 700 years in prison. My former White House colleague, Steve Bannon, is in a federal penitentiary right now. So you tell me when a 73-year-old grandmother gets a custodial prison sentence for praying inside Congress on January the 6th, do you think we should have faith in our institutions when a grandmother goes to prison for praying?
So what is the hope? What's the solution? What's the suggestion for if you've completely lost faith in your judicial system, your justice system, in the election system, what next?
Win the election for President Trump on November the 5th and clean out the corrupt scum across the US government who think they get to use the most powerful organs of the state against innocent people for political purposes. That's the only hope.
Then what would be your first actions, your advice to Trump for first actions in office within those first weeks?
Oh, I don't need to give him advice. He knows exactly what he's going to do, from reinstituting the XL Keystone pipeline to banning the restriction of fracking in America to securing the border. Basically did everything we did when we were in the White House. I mean, we had the biggest economy. We had the securest border, the lowest unemployment. We crushed ISIS in the period of just 5 months. China was in its box. Iran was on its heels. Just do what we did back then and remember what it was like. Does anybody remember? For 4 years, there were no new wars in the world. And that was thanks to my boss, President Trump. He lives office in the senile bag of mush that is Biden with his moral turpitude.
I mean, in terms,
I've lost you. Can you see me?
Yes, I can see you. Still got you there.
Yeah.
Dr. Gorka.
So Biden becomes president, and Putin invades Ukraine. 1,200 Jews are slaughtered in the biggest loss of life since the Shoah, since the Holocaust. A resurgent China, rampant inflation. Just get President Trump back in office and then America can be great again.
I mean, do you think all of that, you've just mentioned the Ukraine war, the current situation that's going on in Gaza, all of that was somehow restrained by having Trump in office?
Well, isn't it weird? I mean, that when Obama's in office, Putin invades Crimea. When we're in office, nothing happens. We leave. And then Russia invades again, and Hamas does a jihad, the likes of which we haven't seen since 1948. So weird that when Democrats are in power, the world's in flames, and when President Trump is the commander-in-chief, nothing. I think that's all the evidence you need.
It's, again, a very bold assertion. I think some people would suggest...
Hang on. It's a statement of, were you alive, were you breathing or in a coma when President Trump was in the White House? Did we or did we not have no new wars?
You know, I was there. Yes, Dr. Gorka, I was there. But you do appreciate that there is more than just, you know, coincidence of whoever's in office. Of course, whoever holds the highest office in the land in the United States, the number one economic superpower in the world, that is going to have an impact. Of course, I get that. Right. But do you appreciate that there are other factors at play, for example, with regards to the situation in Gaza, that maybe even precede President Trump?
But explain to me why it didn't happen when President Trump was in the White House, and I'll wait.
There was plenty that did and didn't happen, regardless of who is in office.
You're obfuscating. Why was the world stable when we were in the White House?
Their world wasn't completely stable when Trump was in the White House.
By comparison to genocide in the Middle East and land war in Europe, yeah, it was stable.
Look, in terms of what was happening in Putin's mind when he was deciding whether or not he was going to re-invade Ukraine at the time, I'm sure elements of who was in high office in Washington, D.C. gave him a sense of maybe, should I or shouldn't I? But I don't think that was the whole reason why he went back into Ukraine.
So explain this to me. Explain this to me. We informed President Trump that 300 Wagner mercenaries on the orders of Putin are running around Syria destabilizing the region. He responded, kill them all. And within 4 hours in the Battle of Kasham, all of those Russians were killed. Not even Reagan killed 300 Russians in one day. So do you know what Putin's response to that was? Do you know what he responded to us killing 300 Russian soldiers in one day?
Go on.
Nothing. He was so afraid of my boss, he didn't even hold a press conference to protest. I think that's significant, don't you?
Do you think there might be an element of putting too much importance of the impact that Donald Trump has had on all these global events? Or do you think it's he is the answer to it all?
Well, I can only go on empirical data. I don't know whether you're using a Ouija board or tarot cards.
Not Ouija board, but
after he was inaugurated, what happened? We unleashed the American economy. We said, drill, baby, drill. We said, yes, XL Keystone Pipeline. We built the border wall. And within 18 months, we had the largest economy the world had ever seen. Not just, you know, in American history, the largest economy the world had ever seen. And we, for the first time in our history, we were actually exporting energy. We had more sweet crude than we could actually use. So we weren't beholden to commies like Venezuela or OPEC. That's a function of who's in the White House. I'm a counterterrorism guy. That's what I did for 20 years. When we came into the White House, I thought that was the #1 threat. I didn't realize it was China. When President Trump said, you know what, we're going to destroy ISIS and we're going to do it in 5 months, I thought, that's a pretty bold statement. But he did it. He got the lawyers out of the way. He told JSOC and the top tier 1 guys, kill them all. 5 months later, the physical caliphate of Daesh ceased to exist. That wasn't because of Obama or Biden or Harris. It was because the then commander-in-chief said, kill them all. That's why President Trump needs to be back in the White House.
Look, you talked there about the commies. I think you were referring to Venezuela. And I do want to ask you, while we've got you, on a strategy point of view, that Trump's campaign has been referring throughout to Kamala Harris as being a communist or a Marxist. Elon Musk has followed suit, of course, online after endorsing Trump. Do you think that's a smart strategy?
It depends, you know, which segment of the population you're talking to. And I think it's important to note that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Your viewers and listeners can check right now who Kamala Harris is and where she comes from and what she did in San Francisco. When you're pro-crime district attorney, when you say that, you know, law-abiding citizens should not have access to the arms they need to protect themselves, that's what communists and fascists do. What's the first thing Stalin and Hitler did? Disarm the civilian population. And look at her, who her father is. This wasn't a pejorative headline. This is a real headline from the time. When her father was hired at Stanford University, they celebrated in the headline, Marxist economics professor hired to Stanford. That wasn't a pejorative. That was a celebration of a Marxist being hired by one of the most prestigious universities in the world. And that's her daddy. So if the shoe fits, wear it.
In terms of her supposedly being a radical leftist then, to the extent of being communist or Marxist, what do you then make of arguments we even hear from Trump himself that she's weak? So if she were to be weak in office or too centrist or too woolly, how does that also chime with the fact that she's somehow some sort of extremist?
Well, I don't get the question. You can have an ideology but also be weak, right? Not all communists are brave and powerful. I mean, you can be a weak or strong Democrat, you can be a weak or strong Republican, you can be a weak or strong communist. You can have radical beliefs, but if you're a coward, if you're a wet noodle, then that makes you weak, and it makes the situation even worse because you hate America, but also nobody's afraid of you. So you can have an ideology and be weak at the same time.
Just finally, tell me why you think Donald Trump decided to enter what's called the spin room, but, the area post-debate where lots of people are milling around, there's lots of networking, don't often see one of the candidates in there. Why do you think he decided to go in there last night?
To send a message to the fake news, legacy lying media to demonstrate that he's not afraid of them. That would be my supposition, but you'd have to ask him.
Maybe we will. Look, Dr. Sebastian Gorka, thank you very much for your time.
God bless. Thank you.
Well, for an insight into who the real Kamala Harris is, I'm joined now by her biographer, the author of Kamala's Way, An American Life, Dan Morain. Dan, thank you very much for making time for us. I assume you stayed up late to watch the debate last night. Let's just start very simply. What did you think? Were there any surprises for you?
Harris did really well. Kamala Harris did really well. Trump failed. It was a terrible debate for him.
Now, heading into the debate, there was a lot of speculation about how much preparation each of the candidates did, and it seemed to be assumed that Kamala Harris would prepare a lot. You'll know more about that, and Trump would kind of shoot from the hip. Do you think that was what was reflected on stage?
Well, without a doubt. One thing about Kamala Harris is that she comes prepared. She does her homework. This is, I was a panelist on one of her very early debates, her only debate when she ran for California Attorney General back in 2010. And I covered the debate she had when she ran for the US Senate in 2016. This is a woman who spent a lot of years as a courtroom prosecutor, putting people who had committed crimes into prison for long periods of time. And so she knows how to present herself. She's very quick on her feet. She's very smart. And it showed. It reflected last night in the debate. She was well prepared. She had a plan. She had obviously rehearsed answers, but that's what politicians do in debates. They know what they're going to say if they're prepared, and she certainly was. He was. Maybe he prepared. I don't know. It wasn't reflected in his answers.
And the sort of only criticism she really seems to have come in for today from some angles is that she was so rehearsed. People said she was probably holed up in that hotel kind of reading off cue cards for days with her team, because it's that sort of prosecutorial system of approaching it. And so I'm saying, it, like you said there, it sort of sounded sometimes like she was kind of reciting from cue cards that she'd read. Does she have the ability, from what you know of her, from covering her for so long, to go off script? If she wins this office, if she enters the White House and she's faced every day with having to do these kinds of public speaking arrangements, will she be able to just fly off the script?
Well, my experience is that yes. Now, I know her as a California politician, not as a national politician. I was at the Democratic convention in August and covered one of her rallies in Las Vegas, Nevada. So I've seen her in this campaign. She's very good. She's gotten better on the stump than what I saw in California. But yeah, she, this is a woman, she's very quick on her feet. people who underestimate her end up losing. And I think that was one of the things Donald Trump did. I think he underestimated who Kamala Harris is and what her skill set is, and he lost the debate. Now, whether he's going to lose the election is a whole other question. I think the debate was a huge test for Kamala Harris, but also for Donald Trump. And we will know for a few days what the polls show. Nonetheless, I'm pretty much guaranteed this is going to be a margin of error race on November 5th when all the votes are cast. It'll take a few days for them to be counted. My guess is it'll be, a few percentage points, a few tens of thousands of votes in a few states that end up deciding this race. It's very close.
Let's talk about some of your observations of Harris, because you've known her, you've studied her, if you like, for a long time as a veteran LA Times journalist. You wrote your first piece on her, I believe, back in 1994. How have you seen her grow during that time?
Well, she's become more accomplished, but this is a woman who was very smart from the get-go. I mean, I really spent more time with her in 2007 when Barack Obama was running for the presidency the first time. And she was one of his big supporters in California. So that's really where I spent a little bit of time with her, and much more time when she ran for Attorney General in 2010. She's confident. She's comfortable in her skin. She knows who she is. So it's a steady progression. People understood, certainly in 2010, that if she won that first race, that first statewide race in California for Attorney General, that she was going to be a formidable candidate in the future. Republicans nationally saw that. They understood that if she won that first race for California Attorney General, they would have to contend with her for a lot of years. And they spent a lot of money trying to defeat her. They spent more than $1 million back when $1 million meant something in California politics to try to defeat her then. And it didn't succeed. She won by a narrow margin in that first race against a candidate who underestimated her, who was more experienced, older than she was. She ended up beating him by about 70,000 votes out of more than 9 million cast. So it was a very close race. That wasn't decided until the votes were counted a few days later. So it was apparent that she was on the ascent, that she was a rising star in Democratic politics. Now, who would have thought in 2010 that in 2024 she'd be running for president? But here we are. She's she could win, and it would be well, whoever wins is going to be historic. It will be a landmark. But she will she will bring something very new, very different to the White House.
I was going to ask you about that rise, whether do you think she always had it in her sights? I know you don't live inside her brain, you can't possibly say for sure, but we have this sort of grand tradition in other countries like the UK, where I'm from, of politicians saying, oh no, not me, I could never be Prime Minister, but secretly they always have their designs on it. They always say no to the press, but they always want to get there. Is that Harris? Do you think she always had it in her sights to get to that top seat?
I have no clue. I don't know. I do think that politicians, once they rise to a certain level, think, sure, if the stars align, so much of it is luck and timing and it's certainly that is the case with Kamala Harris. I mean, it's skill, talent, determination, ambition, and it's luck and timing. You can't underestimate the power of luck and timing. Who would have thought that Joe Biden would end his candidacy the way he ended his candidacy? I don't think he thought that. I don't think she thought that. I thought that Kamala Harris was going to be running in 2028, not 2024. I thought Biden was going to run. Whether he won was another question. Whether he could have won is another question. But here we are. It's in this instance, it's luck and timing, because she ran. Go ahead.
Well, luck and timing, but also, I suppose, the bad luck of Joe Biden in that last debate for the performance that he gave. And of course, his decision that he had to stand down, or whether it was his decision or not, is contested, actually. But anyway, he stood down. He thrust Kamala Harris into that Democratic presidential nominee spotlight as a result. She's been VP for a while, but how do you think she would have handled that sudden pivot to running for the White House?
Well, this happened on what, July 27th? I mean, so far, to all outside appearances, this has been a pretty flawless campaign. She has not made a mistake that I can tell. I haven't been at all her rallies in the swing states, which is where she's spending most of her time. But, from everything I saw in Chicago at the convention and Las Vegas at her rally in August, she's running a pitch perfect campaign. I'm certainly not reading anything that suggests the opposite. Trump, on the other hand, is stumbling. He's making mistakes. I mean, he talked about Haitian immigrants eating dogs in Springfield, Ohio. I mean, this is crazy stuff. And I'm pretty sure voters will see that for crazy stuff. Now, he said crazy stuff before, and he's won elections. So, so I would not count him out. He should not have underestimated Kamala Harris, and she should not underestimate him.
Was it her ability in the debate then to not take the personal jibes personally? For example, when he spoke to her about her racial identity and, was kind of basically pulling her in to try and defend herself or to talk about herself. She didn't. She spoke about race in America instead. And analysts have pointed out that any attempt in the debate to get her to sort of talk about herself or her failures, her successes, or who she is, she turned it around and spoke about America and the people. Does that reflect what you know about her from having written about her?
Yeah, this is somebody that she's a lawyer. She spent a lot of time in the courtrooms in Alameda County and in San Francisco, and she saw a real tough side of life handling cases in those courthouses. I mean, these are, certainly Alameda County and San Francisco have their share of serious crime, and she was on the front lines prosecuting those crimes. So she understands the downside of America, but she's also a believer in the rule of law, and that's so fundamental to the American way. We aspire to be, not always are, but we aspire to be a nation of laws, and we're supposed to follow certain rules. For all the freedom that we have, there are rules. So yeah, she's following the rules, and when she talks about the America that she believes in, I think it comes from the heart. It's a woman who's the daughter of immigrants from India and from Jamaica. It's a pretty inspiring when you just step back, whether you agree with her politics or not. I don't agree with all her politics, but just step back and think about who this woman is and where she came from. It's a pretty inspiring all-American story.
It has been alleged in the past that voters don't know enough about who she is, her background, her personality, and her history. She did open, I think, in the debate last night, saying that she came from a middle-class background. She spoke on behalf of those people. Like you said, there's elements of her story, her heritage, who her family were, how she grew up, that are coming out. Do you think she's managed to get more of that across in this race?
Well, sure. She has talked about things in this race that I had been unaware of until last night. I didn't know that she was a gun owner. Well, she owns a gun. Okay, that's an interesting piece of information. I don't know how long she's owned a gun. No idea what kind of gun it is. Maybe it goes back to her days as a prosecutor. I don't know. So sure, she's talking about certain things, but one of the facets of Kamala Harris, one that I find quite interesting actually, is that right now she's on the most public of stages running for president of the United States. I mean, there's no more public forum than that. And yet there are pieces of her background we don't know much about. She talks a lot about her mother. Her mother was a huge influence on her and her sister Maya, younger sister Maya. Obviously, I never met Kamala Harris. She died in 2009. But what an incredible story she is in and of herself. A woman who at age 19 in 1958, long time ago, came from India to study, to become a cancer researcher at the University of California at Berkeley. What a bold thing to have done in 1958 at age 19. This is a diminutive woman. She stood 5 foot tall. And yet she succeeded. And I think she imparted on her daughters the notion that no excuses. You've got a brain and use it. And so I think that is reflected. We don't know much about her father. She doesn't talk about her father much at all. And so I find that interesting. He's still alive, yet has made no public appearances at any of her campaign events, was not at the Democratic convention. With her, was not at the inauguration back in 2021. Certainly wasn't pictured there if he was in attendance. So there's there's that blank spot. We don't know. She doesn't talk about it. He doesn't talk about it. Maybe we'll find out in the fullness of time.
That's really interesting, Dan. You see, I wasn't even aware of that. It would make sense to me that she has strong female role models and relationships in her life, but I didn't realize about the absence of any voice from her father yet. But I was actually going to ask you about the woman factor, the female factor in all of this, because going up against Donald Trump, who has had a history of making vastly misogynistic statements, that's no secret. It's sort of dogged most of his presidency before. It's kind of not brought up so much anymore. And I think last night wasn't actually a feature of the debate, seemingly. Everyone's saying, he's going to debate her exactly as he would debate a male opponent. Is the US ready for a female president at last? And would that even form a factor of Harris's presidency?
Well, I think pollsters will say that there are people who will not vote for a woman for president, or a person of color for president. So it's entirely possible that she's not going to get a segment of votes of people who are of that view. Would any Democrat get those votes? I don't know. There are, I'm sure, a few Democrats who would only vote for a white man. But it's 2024. we're the most diverse nation in the world. She comes from the most diverse state and the most diverse nation in the world. And, again, her resume would suggest that, she's certainly not a radical. I mean, last night, Trump called her a Marxist. I mean, that's just ridiculous. It's just silly. This is a woman who, she was a prosecutor, and that came across last night in the debate that this is it's kind of a flag waving person. Certainly not a Marxist, certainly not a radical. She's a mainstream Democrat in San Francisco, which is a very liberal city. She was center left, but certainly not left. When she ran for that first office, district attorney, back in 2003, so 21 years ago, the local paper, the San Francisco Chronicle, endorsed her. And the headline on that endorsement editorial was "Harris for Law and Order." She was running as a conservative. The conservative in San Francisco is relative. I mean, she was a liberal, is a liberal, but is certainly not a radical.
I mean, indeed, she gets targeted by the other side for being a communist, quote, a Marxist, and then also somehow not being strong enough in her positions and having weak policy points. I mean, we talked about that at the beginning of this conversation. I just want to finish down by asking about her journey to being that prosecutor, because we've talked about it a lot. We haven't talked about what got her there. Why did she become interested in that line of work?
Well, I mean, we only know what she says. She says one of the reasons she became a prosecutor had to do with a friend from high school, a friend named Wanda. She talked about Wanda in her acceptance speech. I wrote about Wanda, her last name is Kagan, in Kamala's Way. She was a kid in high school. Wanda was her good buddy, and Wanda confided that she was being molested at her home by her stepfather. And so Kamala Harris brought Wanda into the Harris home, and Wanda stayed with Harris, and Wanda was there for a period of time. They lived up in Quebec, Canada. The Harris family took her in, protected her. Harris has said that one of the reasons she became a prosecutor was to protect girls, children like Wanda. That's a good thing to, it certainly is a story that rings true. You would be affected, anybody would be affected by a friend who had such an experience, and so this is one reason. It certainly surprised people around Harris that she would take this path out of law school, but there she did. And the Alameda County district attorney had quite a storied history. These are names that maybe don't mean much to your audience, but in the United States, they're huge. Earl Warren was a district attorney in Alameda County, and he went on to become Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court. Ed Meese was a prosecutor in the Alameda County District Attorney's Office. He went on to become Attorney General under Ronald Reagan. This has been quite a storied office, and so that she would choose of all the 58 counties in California to go to work in Alameda County. Now, she grew up in Alameda County, but that's where she chose to work. It had a terrific reputation as a very strong office. So she learned from some of the best.
She did indeed. Look, Dan, I've learned an awful lot. We really appreciate your insights for your long career covering Harris. Former veteran journalist for the LA Times and biographer of Kamala's Way in American Life, Dan Morain.
Thank you.
Well, a snap poll taken right after Tuesday night's debate shows the current state of the presidential race between Kamala Harris and Donald Trump. To help us make sense of it, I'm joined by the founder of Deltapoll, Joe Twyman. Joe, always good to speak to you. And I appreciate normally your frame of reference tends to be the UK, but you do look internationally. What do you make of the polling data that we got out immediately after the debate?
Well, immediately after, it is largely meaningless. And the reason for that is that most people won't be watching the debate. Most people won't be paying attention to the detail of debate, and most people won't be impacted by what they saw. Instead, what's important are the narratives, the stories that we tell ourselves and each other that emerge from the debate, that come out through traditional media, social media, word of mouth, this whole sort of thing in the following days and weeks. And it's those things that will have a broader impact on people's views and ultimately on the polls. But the polls themselves have shown consistently that it is very close. And that really is the headline finding of the polling immediately after and immediately before, and for some time now, really since Kamala Harris took over the Democratic nomination. You can point to polls where Kamala Harris is ahead on the popular vote. You can point to polls where Donald Trump is ahead on popular vote. You can point to polls where the Democrats have a lead in the swing states that are actually what is all important in this contest. And similarly, you can point to ones that where Donald Trump and the Republicans are ahead. The point is that it's all within the margin of error, and it's all only a snapshot of where we are at the moment rather than where we will be on the 5th of November.
Yeah, and I think, you know, you and I have spoken about this before, but I think for the benefit of the viewers of this show right now, talking a little bit more about accusations that some polling is biased. When you see something as CNN poll or New York Times poll or Fox News poll, I know they're not your polls, you don't see inside of them, you from Deltapoll where you are, but in terms of accusations of bias in polling and how they're conducted, do you think there is concern about bias?
Well, generally speaking, and I do use the term generally speaking, polling conducted by legitimate polling organisations, whether it's Deltapoll in the UK, and we operate polling in the United States as well, or one of the other reputable agencies here or in the United States or internationally. Generally speaking, all those types of organisations will be attempting to do one thing and one thing only with their polling, and that is to accurately represent the population that they are trying to survey, be that the electorate as a whole or specific groups within the electorate, floating voters for instance, or the voters within a particular state or a particular region. And that is the aim of legitimate polling. Now, in the era particularly of social media, there are some people who operate who are more, I guess, better described as campaign organisations or PR people than actual pollsters, and they may use polls that are not legitimate in order to put their particular point across. And of course, people will pick and choose the polls that they like or are most favourable to their position if they feel that will help their argument. And again, that is not an issue of the polls. That is an issue of the interpretation of the polls. But all polls are subject to a margin of error. That is to do with the laws of probability, and we can't abolish that in the same way that we can't abolish the laws of gravity. And so that means that for any given point, the true value will be somewhere plus or minus, let's say 2-3%, depending on the sample size. And so that means if two polls are within 2% of each other, in other words, Harris is within 2% of Trump, it means that statistically there is no difference between the two. And when you're looking at particular states and particular contests that could come down to hundreds of thousands, if not tens of thousands of votes to decide the overall contest, it is going to be very close, and deciding that is extremely difficult.
That's really interesting, Joe, because I think there's a temptation sometimes when you hear, you know, Harris is 2 points ahead in Wisconsin, or, you know, that's not the truth, but it's just a kind of turn of phrase, or Trump is pulling 6 points ahead here or there. You think, oh, wow, now I'm getting a real indication of what's actually going to happen. But you're saying basically, unless there's an absolutely enormous margin, that we're not actually getting any indication much at all.
Well, the other crucial thing to keep in mind is that polling is only ever a snapshot of public opinion at the moment. You can speculate about what may happen. You can point to particular pathways that could lead to a Harris victory or a Trump victory, but it is only that, speculation. And the actual truth of what will happen, nobody knows, and anyone who tells you that they do is probably trying to sell you something, usually a subscription to their Substack. Instead, what we do know is that these are unprecedented times. To have simply an instance where there was an unsuccessful attempt against a candidate, or that an incumbent president dropped out in favour of somebody else, any one of those individual things would be enough to make the situation unprecedented. And the combination of all of them illustrates just how unusual these situations are. And so you can point to historical precedent. You can say, for instance, that the Democrats have won the popular vote in every election since 1988, with the exception of 2004, which was in the midst of the Iraq War. That would indicate that it's highly likely the Democrats would win the popular vote this time again, even if they don't win the Electoral College. But these are uncertain times, and these are very, very unusual times. And we don't know where we will be by the time November 5th comes along. And it may be that the Republicans this time around do win the popular vote. I think it's very unlikely, given that Donald Trump did not win it last time, or indeed the time that he won the presidency. But we don't know. And that's really the only conclusion that we can draw. It's close at the moment, and things could and almost certainly will change between now and November the 5th.
So why then do people poll? Because, unless, of course, to either sell you something or advertise their Substack, as you've so aptly put it. But, you know, why does Deltapoll, you know, you're the founder of this polling organisation, why exist? Why do polls get conducted if they're not a very clear indicator of what's to come?
To understand what people think. And if it's very close, that is an important conclusion to draw. If one candidate or one party is a long way ahead, that is equally a valid conclusion to draw. But it's understanding where we truly are. Because in the absence of that kind of information, you get people who, for instance, may have what are largely described as inept PhD theses coming on conventional media channels and sitting talking for an extremely long period of time about what they believe the situation to be. And they will say that that is a fact when it is anything but. And so in the absence of that information, you have a risk of all sorts of disinformation, misinformation, and simply lies and exaggeration filling that. And so to be able to understand where the public is important, but not just in terms of voting intention, which candidate you're going to vote for, whether you're going to vote for or not, to understand underlying motivations. What are the most important issues? What attracts somebody to a candidate? What turns off somebody about a candidate? All that provides a really interesting and a really useful and really important overview of public opinion going into any political contest.
That's why it's always so good to speak to you, Joe, because you do just get the clear, unvarnished honesty and truth about the science of what you guys do, rather than somebody being a sort of armchair critic of what's going on. That being said, I'm going to ask you then about anything that's interested you or excited you from what you've seen from polling results coming out stateside about either of the two candidates. Has there been any new information we've had?
I think the most interesting thing is actually not to do with the polling results as they are at the moment, but it's to do with Taylor Swift's support of Kamala Harris. And you may be wondering, well, why is that important? In a close contest, any advantage that candidates can take will be helpful. And Donald Trump seems almost predestined to launch some sort of personal attack against those those he sees moving against him. So it will be interesting to see whether angry old man versus American sweetheart is necessarily an effective strategy there. But also the cumulative endorsements that Kamala Harris will receive, not just from the usual suspects, the Hollywood elite and so on and so forth, but everyone from former Trump officials, including people like Mark Mathis, but also Dick Cheney, the VP for George W. Bush, and on the other side of things, Barack Obama and Michelle Obama, to see them endorse and then provide a long list that ends with "and Taylor Swift," I think will be really, really powerful. And it'll be interesting to see that impact that has compared to Donald Trump, who's so far been able to offer Kid Rock and Hulk Hogan, but seems to be struggling to get even his former vice president, or you could say his wife, to offer a full-throated endorsement for his position. And I think come November the 5th, once people really start paying closer attention, things like that could make the difference where it counts.
And, of course, not forgetting RFK Jr. Look, founder of Deltapoll, Joe Twyman, thanks so much for your time.
Thank you.
From the White House to Gaza, Kiev to Beijing, elections, economics, and the environment compete with conflicts and other complex issues for our attention. In an age of fake news, deepfake, and artificial intelligence,
They've got to have a vote and a say.
it's important to look beyond the loudest voice to understand the truth. From newsmakers to groundbreakers,
My campaign is going very well.
presidents, prime ministers, princes and peacemakers, and cultural tastemakers,
As Arabs, as Middle Eastern, we're too emotional.
join me on The Riz Khan Show for empowering conversation.